Hello, my name is Greg Lane with the Low Volume Lean Center. In this video, I want to take a few minutes to discuss with you how lean principles, and today we'll use Takt Time as that principle, have to be adapted when you take them into the world of high mix or low volume. These would be made-to-order businesses, engineered-to-order businesses, and job shops. My background comes from about 25 years in the lean environment. I worked for Toyota for a number of years and spent a year in Japan being trained by Toyota on their methodologies to come back and work in their U.S. plants, training other Americans on the Toyota system. Sometime afterwards, I purchased a small job shop in Silicon Valley, California, and tried to learn to adapt my lean into that type of environment. And I built on that experience to help many others. So today, let's look at, in high mix, low volume, how do we apply Takt Time? And the quick answer is, we use the times from our quotation process because that is our closest link to the customer demand. Remember, once the customer accepts your quotation and places that purchase order, that is commercially viable, the time, the materials, your markup, and so forth in that quotation. And that's what we now need to plan against and measure against in real time, ideally. But we cannot calculate a Takt Time types of environments. Let's talk about the Takt Time tool for a moment as a tool, and then let's go back and talk about it as a principle. So what is Takt Time? It's a simple mathematical equation. Takt Time is the time available divided by the customer demand. And obviously numerator and denominator need to be in the same period of time. So let's take a simple example. Let's say we have an 8-hour shift that equates to 7.5 working hours in a day, and a customer demands 15 units, means we have half an hour to build each unit, but we need the available capacity to work a little faster because we know we'll have problems. So that's Takt Time in a nutshell. But what is Takt Time essentially? It is our link to what the customer is demanding, and then we try to balance our process capacity around that. So instead, we need to use the quoted time because that's all we have. We cannot continuously try to recalculate Takt Times in these made-to-order businesses or job shop type businesses. So in this case, we've gone back to the principle of Takt Time, and that's the relation to the demand of the customer. And generally, all you know is you have that order, you need to profitably manage that order, and that should get you the next order ideally. That is what we need to manage against. So let's talk a little of how we do that. Next, talk about the technical section of our estimation, because there's two sides to our estimating process, right? We technically calculate a price for something, and then we have what I would call the strategic portion of pricing, and that's where we adjust for the marketing conditions and we bring in our sales and marketing input. But let's for a moment only look at the technical portion of the estimate. In my own business, we finally standardized the estimating process in a type of spreadsheet format as shown. And that was done because a lot of estimating was done previously in the heads of the people responsible for the process. So the process was standardized in my business, and the standardized format kind of becomes your check sheet. And any of you that have an estimation process that is not standardized need to go back and review that and work to standardize it. But here what you see is some materials estimates at the top, and then the various operations, process operations. In this case, this was a CNC machining shop. So we had a number of operations for any part or product we made, and each operation had setup times, run times, certain extraordinary operations to it. And we have an estimated time, and then the gray areas you see is an actual place for the operator, assuming we receive the order for that part, to fill in the actual time and any problems he encountered, operational problems on the job. So what you're trying to do here is verify the estimate against the actual and see how you've done. Now this not only helps in a way in this Takt Time concept and in your planning system, but it's also creating your feedback loop. And this feedback loop of comparing both should help improve the estimating process. Now, what we have here is two possibilities, right? If we have a difference between the estimate and the actual, first of all, that can come very simply from an operational problem. That's why we're asking the operator to note in the second gray area any problems they encounter. If it's an operational problem that's unrelated to the estimating process or ideally our planning times, and that's something that needs to be resolved outside this discussion with traditional problem-solving methodologies. But if we have a difference between the estimate and the actual, and there were no operational problems during that period, then we potentially have an estimation problem. And we should have a feedback loop back to the person or department doing the estimating and try to understand the differences. In my business, we traditionally reviewed this once a week, any differences greater than plus or minus 15%. Why 15%? That's the only time we had available. If we tried to only look at 10% differences, we were overwhelmed by the differences, but we could manage with 15%. But again, each organization would have to find their own. But I find and am very surprised of many organizations that their primary contact with their customers through quotations and estimations, there's no feedback loops, there's no follow-up, there's no comparisons of estimation to the actual. And I feel there's a lot of learning that can happen in that loop. So that takes care of our Takt Time. Now, we next need to talk about managing in real time, because part of the Takt Time concept is really to compare the cycle time to the Takt Time. Okay? And the closer we can do that in real time, we can find our bottlenecks much simpler. So what I'm showing you here is from my own business, my first experiment with what I call a day-by-the-hour board. And in this photo, you'll see the works orders and the works order packages, which contain the routings, the drawings, all the technical information, and the estimate sheet I just showed you. Go on the left side. And in the right, each day is broken down into 8 hours. And that's why I'm calling this kind of day by the hour. And we try to plan each hour out for at least the day we're working in. Generally, we don't plan too far in advance because we're going to experience problems and then the plan needs to be adjusted. So basically, you plan at maximum 24 hours ahead. So Wednesday's been planned, and the operator's actually writing in what he's complete on. So if you look closely, you can see that the first job and the operation of that job was scheduled for 2 hours and it's complete. And the operator's working somewhere along into the second scheduled job. Now, what are the advantages of day by the hour? Well, it should force a justification of problems. Ideally, if the operator gets behind, he should have the opportunity to tell you what types of problems cause them to be behind. Now, again, that can be a wrong estimate or it can be an operational problem. But if it's an operational problem, this board needs to be accompanied by a method to note the problems. That can be written down, that can be put into a terminal, it can be any number of methods, but it should cause the operator to identify those in real time. Again, it can help create the feedback on the quoted times we just discussed. It can help nurture that system and drive that system. It also generally equates to a productivity improvement. My experience, a number of years of putting these boards in place in organizations worldwide, we can generally measure a 10 to 15% productivity improvement. And that comes from really taking away some wasted time that is not productive. That comes from really setting the expectation with the operators, and the operators then being motivated to try to reach that expectation. It can be seen as a form of monitoring the people, but it should be used in a proactive, positive way to remove problems for the operator. And finally, it should help identify our bottlenecks in real time. If you are unsure where your bottleneck is at the exact moment in time, when asked, you have the opportunity to manage your business better by knowing where the bottleneck is and putting the appropriate resources. Let's look at just a few other examples of this day-by-the-hour board to conclude this video. Here's another example where we have parts where the company's building somewhere between 6 and 18 pieces an hour. You can see in the left-hand column is the various hours, 3 to 4 in the morning, for example, and then which product they are working on or scheduled to work on, the goal during that hour, and in some cases there's 2 different part numbers being built and the goal for each one, and then the actual for each one is being written in. The fact it's being written in red does not necessarily mean negative or that the red is bad. In this case, seemed to be the only color or marker that was available. And then obviously we would want the operator noting the problems with it. Let's look at one more board in a different format. This is a series of processes being scheduled, the ball valve, check valve, needle valve, and so forth. And in this type of pigeonhole box, what you're seeing is in 15-minute time increments. That's each column is a 15-minute time increments. The work orders are slotted in, and then depending on the scheduled time for that work order, the next work order is scheduled in accordingly. So in some cases you'll see big long blanks of time left, open time, and that's a much larger work order. Or in the case of the check valve, you see there's a lot of small, shorter work orders scheduled into these 15-minute time slots. And obviously, if you walk by and check your watch, you would understand whether a process is ahead or behind. And then this would need the outlet of a board to identify the problems being experienced in that area. Again, we want to work to resolve problems more in real time in this case. So after watching this video, if this is of interest to you, if this is the type of business you are in and working to make improvements, what could be some of the next steps to consider? Well, one would be going to our website, which is www.lowvolumelean.com, and there's a random selection of downloads just picked from some articles I've written for engineering and technical journals. You might read those and pick up some bits of knowledge and ideas to take into your business. Another would be to read some of the very practical books I've written that really talk about how to apply these methods. First one I would take a look at is Made to Order Lean, which is an introduction of specialized tools for the high mix and low volume, which starts to introduce you to how lean needs to be adapted in this environment. Now, the tools approach can be very limited without the culture being worked on, and those need to be worked on simultaneously. So culturally on plan is a very practical and pragmatic method that's been piloted for a number of years in organizations, and we've had lots of success with, but it's looking at aligning at an individual level people's traits and behaviors, that's what makes up the culture, with the strategy of that organization. Again, this is a very hands-on book to walk an organization how to do that. And finally, Mr. Lean Buys and Transforms a Manufacturing Company is my true story of buying and transforming a small job shop in Silicon Valley, California. And this goes through in a nonfiction format what I experienced, what technical methods I had to work on, and some of the management issues I had to tackle. Finally, there's on the website, the Low Volume Lean website, there's a few other videos that can be viewed, and then there's also some that can be very inexpensively purchased on some of the different elements and how they've been adapted, and those might be good to go over with your team. And finally, you'd be welcome to have a no-obligation phone call with myself or someone on our staff to discuss your current situation, where you need to get to in the next steps, what's hindering you, and we can compare that to our experience and methods and see if there's a way to profitably support you. So I thank you for taking the time to watch